Okay, hi. So I'm planning on doing a series of videos about the Glasgow Worldcon, leading up to and during the Worldcon itself. So I've got here Brian Nisbet, who's the division head logistics for Glasgow. I should say, in sort of journalistic, transparency, Brian and I are friends for 20 years or so. Went to each other's weddings and so on. So if you're expecting hard-hitting journalism here, possibly, click on to the next video. But anyway, so hi, Brian.
Hey, Will. Great to talk to you.
So, and I have prepared some questions in advance, in an effort to be somewhat professional. Okay, so for Glasgow in 2024, your division head of logistics, could you give a brief explanation of what, in the context of Worldcon, is a division head, and what is logistics?
Yeah, so look, a Worldcon is one of the largest volunteer-only run events certainly in fandom, and probably you're getting on to kind of global scales at that point in time when you have, let's say, 7,000-8,000 people turning up to the event, and over the course of the full run, including the 5 days of the convention, about 10% of those people are going to volunteer in some way. There's a little bit of background here, I appreciate, but some of those people have been involved, like I have, since very early on when the bid was announced. And other people will join during the con build-up, and some people will just come along and do an hour or two at the door. And by the way, we love all of these volunteers. But obviously, what this means is a lot of organization. And it's best to think of Worldcon organization like a company. There's a chair at the top, a CEO. And then that chair, in our case, the wonderful Esther McCallum Stewart, has senior managers. And those senior managers, the C-suite, whatever you want to call them, and we don't have that many airs on them, are called division heads. And each division head will have a division to manage. And so most people are aware of things like program. So all of the program events that take place, you'll probably have encountered if you've ever been to a Worldcon or a large convention. Events. So events, for instance, are responsible for the Hugo Awards ceremony and the masquerade and all the really big marquee pieces. So we have lots of these divisions, and some of them are very traditional. Some of them change depending on personality and who is the right person to run a particular area. So division head is a senior manager. It's a C-level role in this organization, again, for want of a better analogy. And there are deputy division heads, and below them area heads, and that there are org charts because we like those kind of things. So logistics is all about moving things. It's very much of what we call a service division. It's not a front of house division. Honestly, we want to minimize the number of times that members see us doing something or interacting with that. There is interaction, and I'll talk about that. But logistics is all about moving things to the right place, helping our members have as frictionless a convention as possible. So shipping and storage, for instance, getting things to the convention, bringing them to the right place is one of our areas. But also con operations is one of our areas. So that's very much of, you've lost something, you have a question about something, you're wondering where something is. All of these things go through con operations. We're also the division responsible for managing the whole move in and move out of all of our venues. Signage is part of our remit. So again, the very obvious, pointing out where things are. And we're also working on a very new area this year, which is what we're calling refuse and reuse, which is all about trying to see what we can do to make what is a large convention, involves people traveling from all over the world, more sustainable. And then at the end of the convention, all the things we've bought, all the things we have, either disposed of as ethically as possible and or passed on to other conventions or local charities or things like that.
Okay, so it sounds almost like if this was a cruise liner, you'd be the shipbuilders, the engine room, and the bridge, and possibly the guys that bring in the food for the kitchen.
I mean, it's interesting. We work very closely with a lot of things. Facilities are probably more the shipbuilders. They're responsible for the venues and things
Oh,
like
right, got
that.
it. Yeah, yeah.
But one of the kind of adages is that facilities arrange the venue, they organize it all, and then they hand it over to logistics. Or sometimes American
Yes.
conventions will call the division operations to run for the
Yes.
8 days
Yes.
we're on site, for instance.
Yes. Okay, cool. That makes sense. That's good. Right. Okay. So going to so Worldcons, I mean, they're all Worldcons, but from my limited understanding, they each have their own themes and styles. And so I know your logistics, not public relations or whatever, but can you tell us a bit about what Glasgow's trying to achieve with this year's Worldcon?
Well, look, the tagline for Glasgow 2024 is a Worldcon for our futures. Um, and that can be interpreted in a large number of ways, but we think that we want to create a Worldcon which will bring more people into the fandom, will bring them into the Worldcon community, will set a standard is not the right word, but we'll kind of set some maybe good principles for Worldcons into the future. The whole world is changing. We're in a very deep period of flux on a number of things.
Yeah.
Um, so one of the kind of the pieces around Glasgow is how can we look at what's happening? How can we try to be the best as a new UK Worldcon? And bear in mind, there's been a Worldcon in the UK. The last one was 2014. The one before that was actually in the SEC in Glasgow in 2005. So it's been roughly once a decade. And there's only been a couple of other European Worldcons in that period of time. So it's really trying to say, we want to be here. We want to get new people, younger people in. We want to look at how we can evolve the wonderful things that are Worldcon and build on what so many people have done before. But it's very important with any Worldcon to make it a Worldcon for that location. It would be utterly wrong as a European con runner to want to run an American style Worldcon in Glasgow.
Yeah.
It's not what you do. In the same way, you don't try and run a Glaswegian Worldcon in Kansas City. It just doesn't work. So you bring in the flavor, the positivity, the culture of the city into that and say, hey, we haven't been here in 20 years. What's here? What's changed? What's new? What's there before that we can build on? And I think one of the big things, one of the big parts of the advertising campaign was the shipbuilding on the Clyde piece that Ian Clark, one of our wonderful artists, produced, which was spaceships being built on the Clyde. And it's really trying to harken back to Glasgow's industrial and incredibly important past and history. And then kind of going, what does that look like for the future?
Okay. I mean, you said about the difference between an American Worldcon and a European Worldcon. I mean, without obviously wanting to get into anything which might cause rush. I mean, is there anything you can give us sort of an example of the flavour of something? In what ways might a European Worldcon differ from an American Worldcon?
I mean, it's and I mean, even look, you can even get closer because I worked on the Dublin Worldcon in 2019, and there are differences between that and the Glasgow Worldcon, even though geographically they are only a few hundred kilometers away from each other.
It is, as you have sometimes reminded, we are two separate countries.
We are very, very much, and indeed, there's a whole, let's not even go there.
Yes.
But it is kind of difficult to describe, really. It's unfortunately, it's one of those you kind of, if you see it. There is a size to America. There is a size to their hotels, to their landscape, to their cities.
Yes.
And I mean, the SEC in Glasgow is a big venue, but how does that compare to the kind of convention centers in the US and the sheer space that they have?
Yes.
And kind of some of the things that they will, the approaches they will take. And I think, it's, yeah, I mean, it really is kind of one of those things that you look at and but there are, so it's very difficult to quantify, and it's very difficult to quantify without kind of going into a long rambling conversation, which
Yes.
may be bad one way or the other. So I'm not going to do it, because these are amazing things and I love every single Worldcon I've been to.
Yes.
But equally, I mean, it was one of the things that James Bacon, who was chair in 2019, said to me. He said, I want, you have to have local people who understand the local culture, regardless of where you are, so you don't make assumptions based on interactions. You have to have local people involved, so that it has that flavor. And I'm not answering your question, and I
No, it's fine.
appreciate
No,
that,
I
but
get
it's
that.
a really
I mean,
difficult one to
I
answer.
understand. I mean, I've been to Gen Con, which is a gaming convention, but I think it was 2008. But that was, I'm not saying it was humanity on a scale that I'd never previously seen, but it was an awful lot of people. And yeah, no, I suppose what you're saying is, if someone is watching this now American, and they've only previously gone to American Worldcons, and they're thinking, will this be any different? Is it just that I'll have to pay more in flights? No, you're hoping there'll be something different they'll notice, something different they can take away from it.
I've never come across someone who's been to a Worldcon in the States and a Worldcon elsewhere. And then we're still talking, not even say the States, North America, which is still held such a huge high percentage of the Worldcons that happened. I've never come across someone who's been to one of those and then has gone to a Worldcon in Europe or in Asia, which have been the two other parts of the world, but Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, which unfortunately far too few people got to go to physically.
Yes.
Has gone to one of those and gone, oh yeah, that was the same. I think if you think it's the same, I don't know what experience you've had, but I've never come across someone who said it. So absolutely. I mean, I went to my third Worldcon in Kansas City, and I was like, after Glasgow and then London, and I was like, wow, it's not that it's so many elements are the same, but it's clearly different.
Yes.
Well,
I suppose, as I say, if you've been to both Kansas and Dublin and not noticed the difference, feel free to say in the comments. Still, yes. Okay, so you are part of the Dublin 2019 Worldcon, and you're now a co-lead of the Dublin 2029 bid. But I know you've worked for and on loads of, in quotes, other people's Worldcons. Could you perhaps tell us a bit about what other Worldcons you've been involved with, how you got involved in this whole Worldcon organising thing, and this is the bit I find quite interesting, to what extent all the notionally separate Worldcons are part of one overall fan community, given that there seems to be a whole bunch of you who work each other's cons?
It's a huge question. So when I was younger, in the early 90s, I used to get Dragon magazine delivered to Dublin once a month, and it would come from, as was TSR UK. And I mean, the gamers watching this will those who've been around long enough will remember when there was a TSR UK, and indeed when there was a Dragon magazine.
Well, when there was a TSR.
Well, indeed, yes. So Dragon,
wherever they are now.
Dragon magazine, full of gaming, full of things, but also full of ads.
Yes.
And I remember reading about this thing called Worldcon, which was taking, and the ad I remember, it was San Jose. It was called Con Jose, that particular, probably Con Jose 2, can't remember. And the notion of going to a convention in America was similar to going to a convention on the moon. It was utterly impossible for what would I have been, maybe 15-year-old teenager in Dublin. And I'd been to I was going to an increasing number of conventions in Ireland and getting more and more involved in them. But Worldcon was this mythical fantasy. And Worldcon happened in North America, and it occasionally happened in the UK. And then 2005 came around, and I had a job and money and quite like Scotland. And so went over to Worldcon in 2005 in the SEC and had a great time. It was a complicated time due to some people, not due to Worldcon as an entity. And I sort of fell out of it again. But we had this thing in Ireland. We were like, we run conventions here. We run
Because I said you had done
conventions that.
things like on the gaming side, you've done things like Galcon and
Oh,
stuff,
I mean,
hadn't you?
I
Yeah.
had chaired multiple gaming conventions in Ireland. I got heavily involved in the International Discworld Convention. So that's 1,000-person Terry Pratchett convention that took place in the UK every 2 years. And that was my main focus. But Worldcon was something that happened to other people almost, but I knew an increasing number of people it happened to. And then we kept on talking about this notion of, well, this thing, but there wasn't really anybody who could bring it. And you could, one of the problems, I think, with some of the bids for Worldcon recently, because again, it's on a bid system like the Olympics, is that it's people who go, we haven't gone to this convention. Now, maybe it's because they just haven't, or maybe it's because international immigration systems are terrible. Maybe it's because global wealth is not equal. But they go, we can run this convention. And the thing about Worldcon is, it's not just a convention you can just decide to run. You have to have been involved. You have to have some knowledge of it's, you know, there are traditions, there are communities, there are ways of doing things. Some of those are things we need to move away from. Some of them are wonderful. It's a very, you know, but primarily the positive, obviously. And so there's a guy by the name of James Bacon who chaired Dublin 2019, who was heavily involved in Worldcon internationally, and he really wanted to run one in Dublin. And he came along and said, I want to do this. And in 2012? And a number of us went, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And running conventions is addictive. I've been running them for 30 years now. If you're the right person, right or wrong personality type, you choose. And so I got involved in Dublin 2019, and that then we were running the European Science Fiction Convention in Dublin in 2014, the week after London in 2014. Went to London, the Worldcon that year. Wasn't working on it, but went, this is interesting.
So you weren't. So when you did the Eurocon, you weren't actually formally doing a Worldcon bid at that point.
No, Dublin 2019's bid launched officially at London in 2014.
Yes.
So 5 years before the event. So we launched officially at London. It was already been talked about. It had already been soft launched the year before. But we launched at London, and then there was carried a big vibe into the European Science Fiction Convention in Dublin the following weekend. And then I went, I should learn more about this. And there was a committee position opened up in Helsinki for Worldcon in 2017. And then I went and worked on Worldcon 76 in San Jose in 2018. And then obviously Dublin 2019. Skipped a year. And it's just wonderful. It's an amazing community, and it's an amazing event. It's, again, as I said, one of the biggest volunteer events in the world. And if you're of a mind to do that, how can you not do it? And also, I met so many wonderful people. And as you say, there are people who turn up in a lot of these conventions because that's what they want to do with their spare time. But also, there are so many people who just do one con and that's it. They do their local. And that could be local within a almost continental area, you know. They might do it once every 5 years. They might do it once and never do it again. But there is definitely churn, albeit we need more people in there. Like any volunteer community, you need more and newer people in there. So Worldcons are separate, but there is a thread, and the theory is, and certainly for me, is that every Worldcon should strive to learn from and be better than the last one. And every Worldcon should want to impart information and hope that their next convention will be better than theirs, because that's the way you continue to evolve and grow a community.
Yeah. Yes. I suppose I should say, right, when it comes to learning from the last convention, there is an elephant in the room. I'm not going to go near the elephant room because I think it's not really what I want to talk about. It's been discussed to death. And it's, you know, but just anyone watching this, yes, I am aware there's an elephant in the room. I'm just not pointing
Let's
out.
not say we didn't. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, yes. It's not. I'm so incredibly ignorant. I'm not aware that there was a Worldcon last August or whenever it was. But yes. Okay, so we're going on to, if you do want to have a Worldcon. So say someone out there would like to bring a Worldcon to their home city. What's involved in first winning the bid and then hosting the convention? What's all the process?
So I'm going to go a little bit before the process and say the first thing you got to do if you want to bid to hold a Worldcon is go to Worldcon. Go to Worldcon, volunteer for Worldcon, get involved in Worldcon is an absolutely vital piece of all of this. But what you do is you gain experience, you become part of the community, and then you start talking about your convention. So you spread the word, you talk about it, you go to you hold fan tables, you have a table, all your stuff talking about it. But what people are going to look for is a venue that can host the convention. They're going to want to know you have people or experience enough to run it. And they're going to want to know that your country, and this is very complicated, I'm not going to go into this in depth, but your country is one that the majority of a community which trends queer, which trends liberal, and that's complicated in many ways, but is comfortable going to. And these can be barriers because the world is a strange and weird place. But then you pull together your team, and ultimately you get to a point 2 years ahead of your date where you have to fill out some papers which say, yes, I've got a contract with the venue. I have this particular team who, have these experiences, and we're going to look at this. And there's a document which you fill out, and that will be alongside the Q&A sessions which take place at Worldcon every year, where you'll be asked questions about, well, how many international flights are there to your city? What's a hotel room cost? So you pull all those information together, and you put it in front of people to say, I want to, we want to do this, and then it comes down to a vote. And the members of that year's Worldcon, they have to pay a little extra, they have to pay a voting fee, but then they vote in what's called a site selection vote for where the Worldcon will be in 2 years' time. There's a wonderful con runner called Tammy Coxon, who has written a great documentation on So You Want to Run a Worldcon. And this is, I think it's on Worldcon, I want to say.org. But the website, which actually has a lot of information on the bidding process and indeed some of this documentation and advice, and Tammy's document is just one of the best, and I highly recommend people go and read it.
So are there any lessons you've learned from Dublin 2019 or from any other Worldcons that you've been involved with that you'll be applying to Dublin 2029?
I mean, if you haven't learned lessons from a convention or an event or anything, I mean, this is that you're going to apply to future events, then you're doing something very wrong. Yes. So one of the things about a Worldcon is quite often it's happening in a new venue for the first time ever. And for 2019, we in the convention center in Dublin, which is an amazing venue that I absolutely adore, but we had some queuing issues on the first couple of days. And I think we didn't really realize just how congested some of the areas might become. Now, we learned a lot very quickly, and we'll be taking that, and we now have a better queuing thing. And I think that realization of okay, no good plan survives contact with humanity. I want a very positive spin on that. So there's areas there, and there's things about use of rooms and how quickly we were asking the venue to turn rooms around, and some things there. That's always a really important thing to learn. I think it's also really important to learn that fundamentally, all of the venues you work with they're businesses, and you really have to go down to a very deep detail of, no, wait, will that cost me extra money?
Right.
Is this
Yes.
actually a final price? Or are you going to turn around and say at the last moment, oh yeah, no, of course we're doing that, but that's going to cost you blah.
It sounds
Um,
like getting married, where you can bring your own cake, but they will charge you
oh
£15 for the
yeah.
knife used to cut it.
Oh God, corkage or knifeage or whatever else is a fun thing. So I mean, I think that um, there are definitely lessons, and the lessons vary between venues. I mean, I think it's to the problem is a lot of the time it's even when you've learned the lesson, the ability to apply it is difficult. And I mean, I think that one of the things you learn from life in general, but from Worldcons, is that people work to deadlines. And sometimes it can be very difficult to instill a sense of urgency when there is a long time left before a Worldcon. And
Mm.
now we have, as a matter of course for Worldcons, you have a timeline from as early as possible, and you at the beginning you say, well, here are my high level things, and then you try and refine that down. And this has been a great experience, I think, for planning the whole piece. And this is not my innovation now. This is other people, but I am fully behind it. But it's also about trying to find that line between, okay, this is now really far away, and oh, this is in 3 months' time, and we are now 3 months and 5 days from the opening of Glasgow 2024. I think the mantra of it's later than you think is a really good one when it comes to this kind of organization. But also fundamentally, there's a piece around making sure that the changes you're making and the work you're doing is right. And what does that mean? By which I mean is, well, is this thing really a problem? Is it perceived to be a problem? How much volunteer time am I using to solve this one particular thing? And
Mm.
that's not to say you don't do it. It's just it's an equation you have to go through, because we're all volunteers. Burnout is a bad thing. And are we running this, are we running these conventions during the most difficult time we've ever seen? No, of course not. Conventions have been planned during even more difficult
Yes.
times. But that's not to say that it hasn't been very difficult. It isn't continuing to be very difficult. The world is always changing. And I think that, one has to be aware of that. So I suppose when I talk about that, I think I was a little bit, when we started Dublin 2019, having run conventions on a 1-year cycle or maybe a 2-year cycle, I was thinking in a different timeline.
Mm.
And Worldcon, the bid and the convention is very much a marathon, not a sprint. But that doesn't mean you can go, well, it's really far away, because it's later than you think.
Mm. Time always does have a habit of logarithmically kind of sneaking up on you, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I mean,
Yes.
and importantly, and this is the really big thing, and I think this wasn't a lesson, but it's a really important thing in all of this, is that this is somebody's annual holiday. This could be the only trip they take. This is not cheap. And so you absolutely have to respect that. But also you have to respect the fact that the volunteers are also paying for this. I'm paying for this as well, and this is a balance. And actually, one of the big things, and again, it's not necessarily a lesson I've learned, but one of the big moves that I think is a big quality of life improvement for many things, is that program slots, which used to be kind of 50-minute lectures in a 60-minute slot, the trend now at Worldcon is to move those into kind of a 60, maybe 70, there's arguments either way, event in a 90-minute slot, which gives people more time to move around. And I said the Worldcon trends queer and liberal. It also trends a little bit, it's people stay in the community for a long time.
Yes.
And so that just slowing the pace a little, while still having hundreds of phenomenal program items, I think has been a big lesson for the community in general.
Yeah, I think I've with Easter cons, sometimes you find it frustrating when there's two items back to back, which you want to do, but you also want to go, well, you go to the toilet and stuff, in between them, and they're at different ends. You want it to be feasible that you can see items, in slot after slot after slot without it being, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, and I do not work on program. I've done program for a couple of conventions, nothing Worldcon size, and I don't pretend to understand, just it's incredible job, and I have all the respect for the people who do it. But I think that when you're running essentially 4 full days of program, so from kind of lunchtime-ish on the first day to lunchtime-ish on the last of the 5 days, you can afford to kind of go, we can still pack in a huge amount of amazing things, but just give everybody, and that's the speakers, the moderators, but also just the attendees and the venue staff who are checking up on things, the operations staff, etc., who are doing just that little bit more time, while still providing an amazing 5 days for all concerned.
I mean, as a 54-year-old man with a 54-year-old prostate, I thank you for that. So, yes. Right. So, as well as running SF conventions, you've also been involved in gaming conventions such as Worldcon in Dublin and Dragon Meet in London. Are there any interesting similarities or differences between the two different types of convention?
I mean, yeah, look, absolutely. They're fundamentally, these are still fan-run events. They are people who are putting in their free time to run an event because they love it, and they love the community, and they love the people, and there's a lot of similarities there. But also, there are definitely differences. Worldcon is that bit more professional than a lot of the events. It costs more money. The Worldcon costs, I think, for a 3-day convention, it's something like €60 these days. Worldcon, depending when you buy the ticket, is going to be at least 3 times that, and that's just the ticket price. Let's leave aside everything else. So there's an expected level of professionalism, and also there's an expected level of information given and preparation given to those who are attending, because Dragon Meet happens in London every year. Worldcon happens in Dublin every year. Even things like the International Discworld Convention, sure, it moves around a lot, but it's always been in the UK. And it's been within a fairly narrow band of geography in the UK.
Yes.
Whereas with Worldcon, you're moving to a different city, and you're kind of going, well, what how walkable is Dublin? How warm does Kansas City get in August? Where is the nearest shops to my hotel? How do I travel around the city that we're going to? So there's a lot more kind of required planning there. And I think just the length of Worldcon is a big thing as well. People have often asked me, and I have not run a Comic-Con, so let me be very clear about this. This is my observation. But the Dublin Comic Con takes place over 2 days. It's a phenomenal event. But people have kind of gone, what's the big difference? And I'm like, well, people go to Comic Con on average for 3 hours. They go in, they look at the tables, they might get an autograph, they get photographs of all the things. People go to Worldcon, and I don't have the none of the stats here. Please don't challenge me in the comments on this, but they go to Worldcon for an average of 3 days.
Yeah.
There are people who go there to, every convention has a certain element of going to see your friends. But this is the coming together of the tribes. It really is this 5-day event every year that people will come to. So there's all of that bound up with it.
So sort of like each day is a different day, whereas with Comic-Con you do the same performance twice. You do it once on Saturday for the people who come on Saturday, and then again on Sunday for the people who come on Sunday, sort of. Whereas you've got 5 days of
there's very little repeated events, and you have the cadence of the opening ceremony. You have maybe an orchestra like we have in we're going to have in Glasgow. You have the masquerade, which is a huge thing.
Who's the orchestra, by the way? Do you know?
I'm not actually. I yeah,
not logistics.
There will be something. I'm not, but
yes.
that's not my. I can't. We have the Hugo Awards, which are obviously unique to Worldcon. So that's a big event. These kind of evening events, that cadence. But in many ways, there's lots of similarities. You have cool, fun people coming along to indulge in their hobby and do their thing and looking to talk to like-minded people about it. And I think, one of the big things with Worldcon, which doesn't take place as much at certainly the gaming conventions I've been in, just the sheer amount of authors, especially, but other industry folks who will just be there, and they're fans as well. And there are guests of honor at Worldcon, and there are special guests, and they are the people who are invited. They're on the, they're on the website. And then you just have the people who just come along.
Yes.
And they're just fans. And sure, they'll be on some panels. They might do other programming. John Scalzi has at several conventions, Worldcons, has run a disco, a dance party thing. But he's not he's just a fan. An amazing, well-known, amazing author fan, but still. And I think that's a really big thing, that family feeling, which is at other conventions, but I think it's really emphasized, or rather most obvious at Worldcon.
I mean, the obvious difference between Comic-Con seems to be that no one's queuing up to sell signed photographs of themselves. They'll be in the bar drinking with
and there are autograph sessions for sure, but we're not charging extra. And again, no shade on the guests and the Comic-Cons that have to do that, but autograph sessions are a standard part of Worldcon, and you queue up and you do your thing.
So I say, you've bought the book, you're not required to pay extra on top of buying the book to have the book signed.
Exactly, yeah. Which is very much of a literary SF fantasy con staple.
Yes, yes. So okay, so Glasgow 2024 will be nearly my first Worldcon, although I have done national conventions, EasterCon chiefly. For many people, it might be their first convention of all. Have you got any advice for me and for them?
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about the 5 days of Worldcon. We've talked a lot about the amount of programming. It can be overwhelming, genuinely can. There will be a program released in advance of the convention. It's online now. It will be on there will be a link when the amazing program team release that, and it'll be sent out in emails and put on social media. Say our program has been released.
Because we should say there's multiple strands of program. It's like a multiplex cinema, isn't it, with 6 different films on it?
Absolutely. So there'll be there tends to be some level of streams or in there. So there's the sci-fi one, the fantasy one, the horror one. Maybe there's one on film and TV. There's academic tracks. That's the word I'm looking for. In there. So there's lots of different stuff in there. Fan fiction, music, filk, all of these things. Take the time to do some planning. Just step back for a moment and go, okay, I'm going to look at the program, and I'm going to, because there's some wonderful apps, and it can be on your phone or whatever else, and go, okay, I'm going to select some of the things I want to see, and also understand that you may well not see them, and that's okay. You might meet amazing people in one panel that you spend the rest of your weekend with, and you don't go to all the things you wanted to go with, and that's okay. If it's okay for you. You are your own person, and do your own way. But genuinely, take the time to plan, because there's a lot. Understand that you're going to have to take breaks, and you should take the time to just step back and go, wow, this is a lot. There are other things, there are more passive things you'll be able to do. The trade hall, the art show, take the time to do those. Figure out, where's your hotel? How do I get from my hotel? Am I on the SEC campus? Can I walk easily or use whatever mobility method I need to use to the con. What happens when I get there? How long do I think I can spend on my feet moving from one place to another? Where are the places I can sit down and rest? And when you get there and read up, we'll be producing a lot of information in the progress reports, trying to give you as much as an attendee, as much information as possible about the policies, about what times things open and close, to give you that ability to prepare. When you get to the convention, again, take moments. It's sure, throw yourself into it, but just plan to take a break now and again, because you can then suddenly realize that you've been going for 12 hours and oh my God, which was certainly easier when I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
The things I would say, which are easy for me to say, your mileage may vary. Just talk to people. And that doesn't mean you have to talk to every single person in the room, but just don't be afraid. If somebody says something you were thinking at a panel, maybe just say to them as you're leaving the room, that was a really good point, or, you know, or maybe take the opportunity in a respectful fashion to talk to the panelists and go, hey, that was great. Have you thought of this? Don't try and engage people in a 3-hour conversation, but just make some comments and talk about
But
things. And
I mean,
I've seen
that's an important one for me, actually. You're saying it is kind of fine at the end of the panel. Obviously, don't delay them, but it is fine just to go up to them at the end of the panel, say how much you enjoyed it, you know, that sort of thing.
So as somebody who's been a panelist at multiple conventions, I absolutely love it when somebody comes up and says, really enjoyed that, especially if they say, on this one particular point, maybe, or something like, you don't have to.
Yeah.
I mean, look, all humans love praise, but just if you have that, and sometimes the person would be like, hey, yeah, cool. Sometimes they'll be like, you know, and they'll engage in a conversation. Sometimes they'll be like, cool, thanks. You know, and it's setting your expectations.
Yeah.
But also then in the bar or the social spaces, the coffee, the just around tables, there'll be plenty of opportunities. Many of them involve no alcohol at all, if that's not your thing. It's just to if you saw someone else in a panel room, or you just say hi. Don't assume what's going to come out of that, but say hi. If there's an author that you've always loved, for instance, and you're like, oh my God, they're right there, say hi. Maybe even if it seems appropriate, say, hey, can I, you know, could I chat to you? And in that, you know, in a suitably respectful fashion, but they are generally their fans too. And it's, they, you know, they're there to engage. They're not on an ivory tower. And I think that's the thing about Worldcon. I've seen very famous authors just sitting around discussing recipes with people in the fan area of a convention, you know, and doing things like that. And it's lovely. And I think that the other big thing that I would say is, if you are able, suitably, mentally, physically, everything else, volunteer. Because this is a convention which absolutely runs on volunteers. We cannot do it without volunteers. And even volunteering for 1 hour at the con will help that convention run and that convention sustain. And the big thing is, you know, not only are there volunteer rewards, that's a big carrot, but also I've met some of my closest friends volunteering at events, whether that's sitting beside someone on a doorway checking badges, which turned into something, or throwing myself headlong into a you know, a volunteer situation and just getting to know a group of people. I mean, I remember in 2005, the con operations team, we all got T-shirts that, you know, that we got made while we were at the con, because we were working so closely together as a team. And I still, nearly 20 years later, you know and interact and am friends with some of those people. So volunteering is a great way of doing it. And honestly, we will only ask for as much as you feel you can give.
Will there be, I think EastCon, they often have a panel item at the start of the first day, which is about how to volunteer. You can go along if you want to volunteer. Will there be any sort of or instructions
certainly
as to how to
have
volunteer?
Yeah, we certainly have some intro panels. I can't tell you exactly what they would be, but there's also information on how to volunteer in the progress reports, which are going out, and in other pieces. And we'll have a very prominent volunteers desk at the convention to answer any of your questions.
So pretty much, yeah. If you think you might want to volunteer, find the volunteers desk, go to them. That's yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Excellent. Okay, then final question. If Dublin wins the 2029 bid, why should the world come?
So, yeah, that's an excellent question, and I'm hoping a very easily answered one, because I think, and I'm just going to say for Glasgow, I'm hoping, and there is still time, that the world will come to Glasgow, which is a phenomenal city, and we're building what I think is going to be an amazing Worldcon for people.
So yeah, people can still sign up. Yeah,
it's all they can still sign up. It's absolutely there. Glasgow2024.org. Absolutely, and also there's online memberships as well, which you can sign up to without getting on a plane. And we're looking at streaming, a large amount of the convention and having it there and having it on playback, and looking at building a really great online convention there as the hybrid piece. So I just want to say that as well. It's not too late, 3 months before the convention. And of course, if you're local, on the island of Great Britain, for instance, or Ireland, or the Western European continent, where it's still relatively easy to get to Glasgow. At this point, there's multiple airlines that fly in there and things like that. It's still possible. To look to the future, to Dublin 2029. Look, I'm a Dubliner. I have lived here my entire life, so I'm biased. I think it is one of the most amazing cities in the world, a city full of art and culture, and architecture, and just lovely, friendly people. It's a city steeped in literature, steeped in history, and that Irish tradition of storytelling, of welcome, is, I think, a great reason for anyone to visit the city, and indeed the country, at any point in time. I think from the point of view of 2029, this will hopefully, should we win the bid, be our second Worldcon. I think we've already talked about some of the lessons that we've learned. We're looking at using one of the same venues and some other venues for the convention. We've learned a lot of lessons there and can improve on what we did before. There's a great passion in Europe at the moment for con running. Thankfully, in a lot of places, but for Europe at the moment, there's a lot of young, energetic people, a lot of whom are working on Glasgow 2024, who we're hoping will continue to evolve into 2029. Dublin's a very walkable city. It's a very mobile city, assuming our wonderful governments continue the public transport moves that they have made of late. And that makes it a great place to come to. And it's also a great base to start from if you want to take longer, either to visit Ireland or the UK or Europe. These are all very, very nearby places. But the convention itself, we're very much in the early days. We're 5 years out now from what we're doing. But we really plan to build on 2019, but also Helsinki in 2017, Glasgow 2024, all of the other Worldcons that have happened since 2019 and will happen between 2024 and 25, to build a great team and to run what will hopefully be a really engaging convention in a couple of really great venues, which will allow us to tap into that kind of that cultural background of Ireland, and continue to facilitate this fantastic global family, which is only growing every year. And we're hoping we can be a fairly important point on that journey, because no Worldcon is a destination. It's a place you gather before you move on to the next one.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Well, my daughter's 11 now. She'll be 16 then. I promised her I'll take her. So
it will be absolutely wonderful to see her there. Yes, indeed.
So, okay. Right. Well, thanks much, Brian. That's been really, really interesting, informative. So thank you much, and obviously good luck for Glasgow, and I'll see you there.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, Will. And like I said, Glasgow2024.org, lots there to see, even if you can't make it to Glasgow this August. But we hope that lots of people can.